Dave, who thought it would be a good idea to produce this event in three different arenas, three different time zones?
That was Vince. Vince wanted to do something really big. It was an experiment, and obviously the fact that it never happened again kind of tells you, that it didn't work. And the funny part is that Crockett made it work better, but that was the same time zone when they did the Atlanta Greensboro double shots for Starrcade in '85 and '86, and I think Starrcade '85. So you know what? Since this is '86, right,
Yeah.
when this went on,
Yep.
I think that it also could have been a way to trump Crockett, because Crockett had already done two, so we're going to do three. We'll do New York, Chicago, L.A., and I think the idea is that we'll get local publicity as a local show in all three markets. And L.A., they gave L.A. Hogan, they gave New York Roddy Piper and Mr. T, which in a boxing match, which was in the mainstream match, and then they gave Chicago all the Bears in the Battle Royal, and and that actually, of all the matches, the one that got the mainstream attention was the Chicago match, the Battle Royal, because Refrigerator Perry was such a cultural figure that year. I think the Bears won the Super Bowl, and he was hardly the best player on the Bears, but he was the most famous player. I mean, it was one of those years where this guy just, like Tebow, where everybody just talked about some guy who's, you know what I mean?
Yep.
He was the guy everybody talked about that year, and Vince got him for WrestleMania for $135,000. They said 350, but it was 135 was the real number. And they got a bunch of other Bears and some other NFL players, Bill Fralick, who, wanted to be a wrestler, and Russ Francis was in it, and I forgot some of the others that did. I think the Cowboys wouldn't let their guys do it. I know Jimbo Covert was one of the guys, because he told me years later about the practice battle royal they did the night before, and the Ernie Holmes, Andre the Giant thing. Which, did you know about that story?
No, sir. Could you please tell?
Okay. Ernie Holmes, who was I think he was with the Steelers, and he was a major, he was an all-pro player. For whatever reason, he was mouthing off, and I don't know if it's wrestlers are fake, or who knows. If it was real, I'd beat all you guys, and people were getting really tired of it, a lot of the wrestlers. So Andre just goes up to him and just goes, "You talk too much," and they had to talk Ernie Holmes down. I mean, he didn't back down or anything, even though Andre was so big. And they were just telling, some of the wrestlers going, you don't want to mess with this guy. And so he didn't mess with the guy. But yeah, that would have been like the night before. They all went to this warehouse and practiced the Battle Royal.
The NFL didn't have an issue with this. I mean, you mentioned the Cowboys. I can imagine any NFL team allowing their players to do this.
It was a different era, and it would, it would be very difficult to get happen now. Although LT was still active, wasn't he, when he did it?
I don't think so. I think Kevin Green might have been.
Kevin Green was active for sure, yeah. And McMichael, I think, was still active when he. No. You know what? His career had just ended, didn't it? McMichael. But Kevin Green did it a couple of times. But yeah, you could never do it now because they have those clauses. But I mean, one of the teams, and I think it was the Cowboys, did end up banning, because I think Too Tall Jones maybe got banned and ended up being a referee or at ringside at the last minute. But the rest of the teams, they didn't ban it. Well, you got to remember in those days too. I mean, it wasn't that far removed from the era when players would wrestle in the off season because they weren't getting, football was not considered a year-round job. The football players would work regular jobs during the off season. So, for a lot of them, the regular job was work as a pro wrestler.
Sure. This event, curiously, although I don't know if at the time it was curious, was held on a Monday. Yeah. It wasn't really a thing then, Dave, necessarily, right, that these mega cards had to be on a weekend night.
Yeah, and I don't even remember why it was on a Monday. What was it? Was it that was the one, because I remember that it's WrestleMania 2 was the one, because that had the Funks and JYD and Tito Santana, I think, right? I'm trying to remember.
Haas Funk.
Haas, yeah, and it had the Roddy Piper boxing match, that horrible boxing match. So, yeah, I remember, I mean, the funny story of me watching it is I worked all day, a regular job, and then we couldn't get it where we lived. We didn't have the closed circuit, and there were no theaters. And so me and a couple of my friends, it was where I was living in at the newspaper I was working, there was nothing within an hour. So we went so there was someone who I know who lived about an hour and 15 minutes away. And anyway, I got lost going to their house, or I didn't even get the right directions or whatever. So we're driving around this city, over an hour away, and just going up and down streets. And then we see this place, this house with all kinds of cars in front, and it's like, well, this looks like it could be them. So we ring the doorbell, and there were all these people over there watching WrestleMania. And I think what happened was one of the guys who I was with knew one of the guys in this house.
Wow.
Okay, so he just invites us in, and we watched, WrestleMania. It's the craziest story at that house that night.
And it's not even the house you set out to find.
Oh no. In fact, I don't know who the person was, and they didn't know who I was or anything like that. But it was me, the girl who I was dating, and two other guys. And one of the guys from that town knew there were about, in the other house there was probably 10 guys. And we opened the door, and I go like, is this the house? And they're watching wrestling. It was just starting. And in fact, I think I missed the first match. It was the Adrian Adonis Uncle Elmer match, because I later watched it on TV. But yeah, so yeah, it was just a crazy story. Yeah, the one guy who was with us knew one guy in the house, and they invited us in, and we watched WrestleMania that night.
There it is. Now, how hot were they? I mean, WrestleMania 1 was such a success, so everybody knows, really how hot they were from a cultural standpoint.
Yeah, two wasn't like one.
Yeah.
Nothing even close. The big, the Refrigerator Perry thing got a lot of mainstream, but it wasn't like Mr. T. It wasn't the first one was big because it was the first one. You had Cyndi Lauper, you had that whole Roddy Piper, Cyndi Lauper, Lou Albano thing. You had the MTV shows. By this point, there hasn't been nothing on MTV. MTV and Vince had their split because MTV wanted a piece of the WWE and Vince didn't want to give him a piece. So they said, well, if we're not going to get some ownership, we're not going to put you on TV anymore, even though the ratings were phenomenal. Mm-hmm. So Vince walked away from the MTV deal. And they did have an NBC Saturday Night's Main Event at the time, so they got a couple of specials there. But whatever it was, they weren't. Those specials didn't have the great angle like the Mr. T angle with in the Hogan Piper match to set up the first WrestleMania. To me, watching at the time, I was thinking like, this is like the greatest wrestling angle I've ever seen, because it's Mr. T. Like this mainstream star running in and throwing around the Keystone Cops. You know what I mean? It's like. It was just awesome. The second one, it was Hulk Hogan and Bundy squashed him in a corner. It's typical wrestling angle. It was no big deal. Piper and Mr. T. Mr. T had really fallen in that year. He was not nearly as hot as he was the first year. So the fridge was the big thing, but the fridge wasn't in '86 as big as Mr. T was in '85.
How much did Mr. T pull down in terms of payoffs for 1 and 2?
I don't know. I think he was around 200,000 for the first one, but I don't even know what the second one was.
Now, at this point in time, in reading The Observer all these years, I seem to have this idea in my head that even as early as 1986, Vince McMahon was having thoughts of moving on from Hulk Hogan. He was already interested in finding another muscular, super charismatic babyface. I think I heard of this in the context of you telling the undertold story of one Tom McGee, who was around at this point in time. Can you talk about that?
Oh, God, I'm trying to remember what year the Tom McGee thing was, but it was... I think
it was 87.
Yeah, I think it was 87 also.
But in the context of that, it was like Vince was already thinking that Hogan, it's time to start thinking about a life after Hogan, even at the second WrestleMania.
Yeah, or maybe he didn't think Hogan was the guy, or maybe, Hogan was starting to make demands because, Hogan had leverage. Maybe it was a way to out-leverage Hogan. But no, with Tom McGee was a bodybuilder, power lifter who was, probably 6'4.5". Just a little shorter than Hogan, much better physique. Great physique, good-looking guy, and one of the strongest men in the world. Not just a bodybuilder, but a super strong guy who could do the splits and could do backflips. He had a gymnastics background. Everything when he first got into pro wrestling, which was in Calgary, New Japan loved him, and Stu Hart loved him, and we thought he was going to be the biggest thing in wrestling with that background. He won some World's Strongest Man contests. And the only problem was he had no charisma as a pro wrestler, and he couldn't wrestle to save his life. He was terrible. But, they brought him in, and it was in Rochester, New York, and they brought him in to work with Bret Hart, because Bret was a good hand. And it was like, Bret, see what this guy can do. So Bret knew the guy because, and maybe one of the reasons they used Bret was because because Tom McGee broke in working for Stu. So Brett talks to him and just goes, what can you do? Blah, 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 blah. So Brett and Tom Magee have this dark match. Unless you were in Rochester that night, or you're me, Bret Hart, and one or two of Brett's friends, and maybe, some people in WWE who may have found that tape, although I'll tell you a story about that in a second too. No one's ever seen this match. So I can tell you, I got a tape of this match from a weird source. But it's almost, I know that I can tell you for a fact they have it in the WWE vault, but nobody knows where it is, because I know guys if you work in WWE, where, if you're in developmental or you're on the main roster, one of the perks that you get is that they have people in that warehouse, and you can just go in there and order, it's like, I want to see Ricky Steamboat and Randy Savage. I want to see whatever, I want to see the Ricky Steamboat Bret Hart match from Boston. Even not famous matches, but matches that became famous later because they were with famous guys. I want to see this, anything that they have on tape. If you order it, they'll go through the warehouse, if you have the right date and everything, and they'll DV, put it on a DVD and they'll send it to you so you can see it. And I know several guys who have ordered that Bret Hart Tom Magee match, and no one has ever gotten it. So if they have it, they don't know where it is, or they've locked it up, which I don't believe, and there's no reason to have locked it up. But anyway, so no one knows where it is, but I have seen it, and I will just say this. I mean, when Vince McMahon and Pat Patterson saw that match, they thought that Tom Magee, can't miss, going to be the biggest thing in wrestling. Okay, I watched that match, and 10 years later, 8 years later, whatever it was, 15 years, well, no, let's see, it'd be 98, so it's 11 years later. So I'm watching this match 11 years later with the full hindsight that Tom Magee couldn't work a lick, and that Tom Magee never made it. And I watched this match, I'm going like, my God, this guy's going to be the next big thing in wrestling. Bret Hart made this guy look like he was, God, who could I compare him to? I don't know.
Good.
He I mean, bigger than, better than Hogan, because he was doing backflips and drop kicks, and he was Hogan's size, and his timing was perfect and everything. And it was funny, he just looked absolutely phenomenal. And I talked to Bret about it, and Bret goes, no, he was terrible. But Bret was in the right place at the right time, and knew how to construct a match with the three things the guy could do, and those three things were really impressive. And they thought, then they signed him to a big contract, and thought that he was going to be the next thing, when it was actually the spot that Ultimate Warrior got.
Yeah.
Of the heir apparent. And, he never even made it. I don't believe he ever even made it to television. Or if he did, it was very few TV matches, and no one even remembers the guy.